It's live.
Not yet, just wait a second.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, you're live.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We apologize for some delays in getting started, but we've got some wonderful guests today. We've got Irene and Alex joining us from the Virginia Civic Engagement Table. Thank you both so much for joining us. And we are going to talk about election protection in the Commonwealth today. Irene and Alex, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves to our audience.
Yeah, my name is Alexandria Bratton. I go by Alex. I am the program manager at the Virginia Civic Engagement Table and run point on our election protection efforts here.
Thank you.
And I'm Irene Shin. I'm the executive director of the Virginia Civic Engagement Table. I don't run point on EP. I support Alex, who is the queen of EP and all of the things that she does for EP.
Well, thank you so much. We are pleased to have you both joining us today. So while we're here, let's just go ahead and dive into the questions that we've got for you today. We can start with what are some of the options to vote in this election coming up in November?
That is a great question. This year in Virginia, there are so many more ways to vote, which is super, super exciting. We are excited about the fact that voting is now more accessible to Virginia voters. And we all know that we can exercise our right to vote on Election Day, which this year is November 3rd, 2020. But also beginning this year, July 1st, Virginian voters have the option to either vote in person early or request to vote by mail. And both of those options can be done without an excuse. So that is open to every Virginia voter now.
Great. And what is election protection? And is it just for Election Day?
Also a great question and something that we get asked quite frequently, actually. Election protection is not just about Election Day. It's everything that leads into Election Day and to the moment when a voter goes into the ballot box to cast their ballot, right? It's ensuring that, one, election protection is, for us, I think of it as a year-round program. We work on making sure that legislation or advocacy work around how voters get access to the ballot is thought about and protected. And then we also have there's another leg of election protection where it's like making sure that the general public, that voters know that there is a hotline that they can call, 866-OUR-VOTE, if they have problems on Election Day or leading up to Election Day, casting their ballot. They have problems, questions, just need help, right? 866-OUR-VOTE exists solely to help voters make sure that they can cast their ballots. And then on Election Day, election protection looks like some of the activities that we run include having poll monitors at polling places, making sure that there aren't questions, that voters have all of the information that they need to go in and successfully and safely cast a ballot. And also making sure that that our poll monitors are trained up to make sure that everybody who is there to cast a ballot is able to do so as safely and as unencumbered as possible. And that sometimes is as easy as being like, hey, making sure that folks who show up and need curbside access to vote on the curbside, they're getting the help that they need immediately. And then it could be as wide ranging as like making sure that folks know that they don't need a photo ID anymore to cast a ballot in Virginia, right? You can sign an ID confirmation statement and making sure that those are all being executed by poll workers in the way that respects a voter's right to vote.
That is a lot of great information and work. Besides the right to vote, what other rights do we have in elections?
Yeah, there are a number of rights that voters have when going to cast their ballots. Some of them include I think about basic things like making sure that every voter has the right to cast a ballot free from fear of intimidation or harassment. I think about voters who have the right to, for example, we talked about curbside just a second ago, but making sure that voters know that they have the right to vote curbside if they're 65 and older or disabled, and they don't have to go into the actual polling place. And this year, in light of the COVID-19, that seems like an even more urgent and pressing right that folks should take advantage of. And then there's things like the what else did we talk about? There are I think that that's all I can think of right now, actually. Alex, is there something that I'm missing here?
Yeah, I think a couple other things that we could mention is, the right to have someone there to help you if you need assistance with filling out your ballot. That person cannot be an employer or a union rep, but it could be an election official that's inside of the polling place. It could be a friend of yours, a family member. But if you know that you're going to need help translating your ballot, or even just some assistance getting to the ballot box and things like that, like you can have that assistance there, and no one can tell you that you can't. Also, you can, in Fairfax County, excuse me, you have the right to language accessibility for for Chinese and Spanish, which is awesome. Excuse me, I'm sorry, it's not Chinese. It is Vietnamese and Spanish. Those two languages have been added to all of the materials that folks get when they come in to vote and on the signage that is at the polling locations. And so those are things that have expanded our democracy and allowed more folks the ability to vote and feel like they can do it on their own. So super excited about all of the things that are in place for election security.
Absolutely. Should voters report problems with the voting drop boxes to the hotline?
That would be a hard yes. Definitely. Voters should absolutely report any problems they have in like the point of like receiving ballot to like turning it in. And that includes any problems that they may see or encounter at drop boxes.
Fantastic.
Can I just like take a moment and say like that's also an exciting thing that we've added this year? There are expanded drop boxes in the across the state, right? They're now available at all local registrars. They'll also be available at all early voting sites, and on election day they'll also be available at all polling precincts. So if you still have your absentee ballot in hand on election day and you're like, I didn't have time to drop it in the mail, you can like run it to your local polling precinct and drop it off there in person, and it'll still get counted. So as Alex said earlier, really exciting to have so many new expansions and expanded accessibility for voters to be able to cast their ballot.
Absolutely. What should voters do if they show up to vote in person and they're told they're not allowed to vote?
I'll jump in here, Alice, and you can feel free to add on if I'm missing anything. But I think the end goal should be to figure out why they're being denied a ballot, and understanding that, right? So if a person is denied a ballot because maybe they're not on the registration roll, at the very least, every voter should be able to cast a provisional ballot. And like that's what we encourage all voters to get to at the end of the day, right? Try and cast a provisional ballot because there may be a mistake in either in the poll book or in the registrar's roll. And yeah, so I think that's one thing. The second thing is if you are experiencing problems at the polls and you're wondering like, why am I being denied a ballot? Voters should definitely call 866 our vote, and we can help provide assistance to troubleshoot and figure that out and get to a place where you can either get registered to vote for the next election if that's the problem, right? Or making sure that we can figure out some way to help you understand why you're being denied a ballot. But for us, I think of our mission and our goal to getting to a place of like, yes, and like, why is this person not being allowed to cast a ballot, but figuring out how to get them to a place where they can.
You've answered this in passing so far, but on the most basic level, why do we have election protection hotline?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, all of the questions are great so far. I think it exists for a couple of big reasons. The first is we want to make sure that every eligible voter is able to cast a ballot that counts. So that means during the early voting period, that means on election day. We want to make sure that every eligible voter who casts a ballot actually casts one that does get counted. And so we want to make sure that we are able to help mitigate some of the issues that voters encounter either during early voting or on election day. And we can help mitigate those things like in real time. And so what we've seen before, EP existed, right? Like folks might have gotten turned away and they just were okay with that. I mean, they were not okay with that, right? Because nobody feels okay about having their vote disenfranchised at all. But I think because there was not a system in place to assist them in real time, we kind of just had to deal with it and be, just accept it as fact, right? If the folks inside say that you can't cast a ballot because of whatever reason, then that was just, you had to take their word for it. These days, like, we don't have to do that. And so that is one of the biggest reasons why the hotline exists. The second biggest reason is it allows us to track data and be able to track it and view trends in different issues that folks are having, not only in the state, but across the country as well. And it pushes what we advocate for at the legislation level, both on the state and federal level. But also it allows us to help work with local registrars and the State Board of Elections to help put guidance in the hands of the folks that are running the elections so that they can run more smoothly. And so there's a lot of different moving pieces to why EP exists and why the hotline exists, but the biggest reason is so that we can help voters in real time so that they can cast a ballot that counts.
Fantastic. If you witness something weird happening at the polls, what should you do? And while we're at it, can you help us define what is weird and what people should look for?
Absolutely. So if you see something weird or it just doesn't feel right to you, please call the hotline number. You can either call it or you can even text the number. That will, one, make sure that it's recorded so that we see what's going on, but we can also try to mitigate it on the back end to try to fix it so that it's no longer an issue that other voters are seeing. Some of the weird things that folks can be on the lookout for are extremely long lines, broken machines, poll workers who may be giving out wrong information. And I do want to ask for some grace with some of our poll workers, right? Like, there's a lot of new poll workers that are coming into this election season. And they are also volunteers that are doing this work. They are highly needed because we need as many folks as possible to make sure that polling precincts run smoothly. So just a little bit of grace with poll workers because sometimes they, don't remember all of the new things that may be in place. And this year we have a lot of new laws that are taking effect for this election. And so even if they volunteered in June, it may be it's very different come November. So just a little bit of grace there. If folks see intimidating flyers or flyers that have wrong information, we want to know those things. If there is police presence, especially police presence that is not warranted, right? If there's nothing going on, but we see armed security or armed police officers just set up at a polling location, we also understand that the presence of police for many BIPOC communities also is not a safety factor, right? And it could deter folks from actually coming out to exercise their right to vote. And so, we want to know if that is happening across the state. If multiple voters are reporting that they're not on the poll books, or if folks see a lot of people coming out with provisional ballots, the indication there is that they come out with a green sheet because the instructions on that green sheet are what indicate like what that person needs to do in order to have their ballot cured. And one of the other biggest are a couple other things that I think are weird, right? Or things that don't settle right in our stomachs, right? If polling places open later than 6 a.m., or if they close before 7 p.m., or the last person in line has had the opportunity to vote. We've seen that happen before in other areas, and we want to make sure that every person who's standing in line at 7 p.m. have the opportunity to cast their ballot. If voters who don't speak English are having issues and not getting the assistance they need, if polling places aren't ADA accessible, which by law they all are required to be, and then anything else that you see that just doesn't seem right, like we want to know all of the things. And so we ask that you just call that 866 Our Vote number and let us know what you see and what's going on.
Fantastic. And after you report something to that hotline, what should you do next?
So as the voter or the person who sees it, please trust that we are doing everything in our power to mitigate that issue. So as soon as you call the hotline, a ticket is made into a system, and the folks in our command center are actually reviewing those tickets like as they come in. We're making phone calls to registrars, we're making phone calls to the State Board of Elections if need be. We're making phone calls and making sure things are getting fixed in real time. And we also have volunteers who are going to be on site in many of these locations. And so if we have to send someone to a site so that we have eyes somewhere, we can do that. So as the observer / voter who sees something going on, we just ask that you don't engage in whatever behavior that is for your own safety. But please trust that we are doing everything in our power on the back end to ensure that that issue does not continue.
Great. And just to piggyback on that, if you have pictures or videos to support your claim, what should you do with them?
You can actually text the 866, our vote number as well. So if you have videos or pictures, please text them to that number. We do ask that you do not post them and share them widely on social media. I think in this digital age that we live in, like everybody wants to get the information out as quickly as possible, thinking that they're doing something good. We have also seen where that information actually can deter folks from coming out and exercising their right to vote. If folks see a long line or intimidation happening at a polling precinct, it may shield them or may make them not want to actually come out and vote. And so we don't want to participate in any additional ways that folks, it would disenfranchise voters by making them feel like they shouldn't or they don't feel safe to actually come out and vote. So we ask that you text them to the number so that we can work on getting it fixed, but not to blast and throw it on your social media.
Fair enough. And once again, what is the number to call if you want to report something going on at the polls?
So the main hotline number is 866 Our Vote. That number is 866-687-8683. I do also want to highlight that we have access to some language lines as well. So if you are a person who would need some translation in Spanish, there is a Spanish hotline available. That number is 888-839-8682. There is also a hotline that helps folks with Spanish, Korean, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Bengali, Hindi, and Urdu. And that number is 888-274-8683. And then there's one last one that is for folks who speak Arabic. And that number is 844-925-5287. And yeah, so there's lots of hotlines available to folks, especially folks who may need some language assistance. And you can also call those hotlines if you experience an issue and you need some help mitigating that issue in language. So we hope that folks use all of the hotlines this election.
After you get a call from someone, what do you do on your end at AP? How does the EP hotline work?
Alex touched on this a little bit, but basically, as soon as a call comes in, let me start over. As soon as a call comes in, a ticket is generated on the back end of our dashboard, and so we're able to see exactly where the location of this incident is happening, if the person themselves is directly affected, or if they're observing something that's going on. That's sort of so after we've gathered all of the information of like what's happening, what's the incident, we then sort of triage what's the right next step of escalation. Sometimes that could be as easy as calling the registrar's office and saying, hey, this is what we're seeing or we're hearing about on the ground in this precinct. How do we solve for this and ensure that this is happening, and or get in contact directly with the chief election officer on site there. Those are like sort of the easy ways to quash problems. The second step of escalation could be going to the register, or the county's electoral board, or figuring out like if there is another level of escalation that is necessary in order to get to a resolution that we think is warranted. And then third, it could also go and depending on like when, at what point in the cycle, at what point during early voting this is all happening, if there's enough time for us to escalate it and it's warranted for us to escalate it as high as like going to the commissioner, the state on a state level, right? To be like, yo, this is what we're seeing that's happening. Like, how do we address this? And make sure that this isn't what's going to be continuing or perpetuated, moving going further into the early voting period or leading into election day. I think those are all steps that we take to try and mitigate situations. And sometimes it could be as easy as making sure if it's at a precinct where we have a volunteer, having that volunteer just like immediately on site, go and take care of go handle the issue, right? We can talk about an example just last week where we had a blind voter who went to go vote. And when they arrived, they called the curbside voting number and nobody answered for like 40 minutes. Right. Fortunately, we had a volunteer on site who was able to like go and assist that person and like go into the office and be like, yo, poll workers, you have someone outside who needs assistance. Like, let's get this taken care of. Right. So sometimes it's an easy solution and our volunteers can be immensely helpful on site. But it sort of is, there's a range of issues that we encounter and are prepared to solve for and have appropriate responses for all of them.
How can you get involved in helping the EP movement in Virginia? Do you need to be a lawyer? And how does the EP hotline protect our rights?
Yeah, so I think to answer the second question first, I think the EP hotline protects our rights because one, it helps you if you aren't sure what your rights are as a voter, we can help you walk through those things. And it also it also is there as a resource for folks if and when they come into a situation where they may feel like their rights are being infringed on as a voter, and we can help you walk through the process of like what steps need to be taken in order to ensure that you cast a ballot that actually counts. To answer the first part of that question, if folks are interested in getting involved, we are still looking for volunteers during our early voting period and on election day. And so if you are interested in doing early voting period work, you can email myself at alexandria@engageva.org. That is ALEXANDRIA@engageva.org. And if you are interested in doing election day work, you can find us on our EP website, and that is protectthevoteva.com. And you can sign up right there, and we will get to you pretty quickly with information on how to get trained up, get materials to you, and all of that. So we do have 3 different roles that we are recruiting folks for election day. We are recruiting folks for being stationary poll monitors at some of our either highest incident locations, areas where we know there are high populations of folks who need language assistance, and or high traffic locations. We also have opportunities for folks to rove, which the volunteer would need to have access to a vehicle because the information that you are making sure that folks know is on a card magnet that sits on your car. And so that card magnet has the 866-our vote number on it, in addition to the language lines that we talked about earlier. And then the last thing, we have sign team folks. And so we are going to be spread out across 26 different counties this year, which ultimately will help upwards of 3.6 million voters in Virginia. And so we need folks that are available to drop signs with the hotline information available the day before elections or the evening before election day, and then pick those signs up. And so we are also looking for sign team members to volunteer for those roles. And I'm sorry, and then for early voting, we are looking for stationary poll monitors. So again, if you are interested in that role, please email me. It's not the same sign up as our Protect the Vote VA one. That is strictly for election day.
Fantastic. And can you share that number with us one more time?
Yes, that is 866 Our Vote or 866-687-8683. And you can call or text that number.
Fantastic. I want to thank you both so much for your time today. It is greatly appreciated and all the work that you're doing out there. For folks watching, I just want to thank you for watching, but also remind you that we've got some very important dates coming up. October 13th is the last day to register to vote in the Commonwealth. October 23rd is the last day to request an absentee ballot by mail. And then October 31st is the last day to request an absentee ballot in person. If you already have a ballot, you have an absentee ballot, I encourage you, please go return that today. If you have any questions about voting at any time, visit voteva.us or call 866 Our Vote. Please go out, vote safely, vote securely this election season.
Thank you all for having us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Yeah, thanks all.